welcome back to the 100 Report. I'm Chris.
I'm Charlie.
And we're back after a hiatus, and we have a hell of a lot to talk about, don't we?
Yeah, that was a pregnant pause, if ever there was one. We've been out for a while, but we've both been busy doing our day jobs, so to speak, and we have a lot to discuss. We've had the PSL finish, we've got England in the West Indies right now on a tour, we've got England women's in the World Cup, we've got the 100 draft to talk about, but I think unfortunately we have to start on some bad news. We've lost two absolute legends of the game, Marsh and Shane Warne, 2 weeks ago now, and for me the news still hasn't sunk in that Shane is not with us anymore. I was literally listening to him on a Sky Sports podcast a couple of days before I heard the news, and he was talking about the 100 and London Spirit, and they were kind of pushing him and probing him to see whether he would actually be interested in taking on the role as England head coach, and he said that it definitely would be something that would interest him.
Yeah. Oh well, I guess we'll never know, but that would have been cool. I heard about Shane Warne. I remember my friend texting me in the middle of the day, and it sounds strange, but especially if you're a cricket fan and you spend so much time watching these matches, and especially commentary, there's a sort of part of it that feels like they're a part of your life. And I was actually really upset when I found out Shane Warne had died. But yeah, it's a terrible, terrible tragedy. And obviously Rod Marsh died as well. And we've lost a couple of legends. But it does bring on the latest news is that the 100 draft has been postponed because of Shane Warne's state funeral, which was going to be on the same day. So the draft's been moved to April the 5th now. We're going to get a bit more of an idea. I guess moving on to brighter stuff, we can talk about the 100 and the news that's been going on. First off, we've got a couple of really cool interviews that we're going to have. We have got Abi Slade, who is Twitter extraordinaire, was a super fan during the Ashes. And we also have Mo from Mo Blogs, who is probably the biggest PSL fan that I've ever spoken to. But I guess we should talk a little bit about the 100 coming forward, because we talk with them about quite a lot of things about the PSL, about the Women's World Cup, BroadandAndersonGate, which we won't get into. But we'll go into the 100. Now, obviously, the retentions came in February, and each team could keep up to 10 of their players. I think the only remit was that they had to keep both of their England players, so the centrally contracted player and the local legend. But everything else is up in the air. And what was your take on the squads overall?
Well, it's interesting because some squads retained the majority of their players and you didn't see sort of much changing, and others had what looks like a total rebranding. So I think it was the Manchester Originals that didn't retain any of their international players, and a lot has changed with them. Similarly with the Trent Rockets, with the women's team, there's only a couple left now in that team on its own. So it's interesting to see who's mixing it up and who isn't. Now, I was speaking to Chris off air a minute ago about how do they know the scheduling yet for this summer, because a lot of the teams I felt were really let down last minute with a lot of their international choices, the big names that were supposed to be joining them, because of their scheduling with their own countries. So we were just talking now about the Southern Brave. They retained Marcus Stoinis, no brainer, and we were talking about, I'm sure they're going to try and get David Warne, as they had originally, then he left, then he came back, then he left again. But do they know the Australia schedule yet? Because that was a big blow for them last year.
That was the big question I had, really, because, I mean, the Southern Brave, it was like a one in, one out thing eventually. There were so many overseas players that were in and out. I think at one point it was David Warne, Shadab Khan, and then it was Devon Conway and Quinton de Kock. And then it was
Andre Russell at one point, yeah.
Yeah, and then Andre Russell. Tim David is their retained overseas player, the other one apart from Marcus Stoinis. So it's very difficult to keep an eye on what's going on. But I was hoping that you, the listeners, might be able to help us out. What do you think as far as the summer scheduling conflicts? Who do you reckon are the best overseas players to go for? Are they the New Zealanders? Are they the Sri Lankans? Are they the West Indies? Let us know. Stick something in the comments and descriptions if if you have any thoughts one way or the other.
I think now's a good time to introduce our chat we had with Moblogs, because we were asking him which, amongst other questions, which players he thought from Pakistan would work really well in the 100. Here's what he had to say.
Mo, thank you so much for joining the 100 Report. How are you?
I'm good, man. Like I said, Lahore Qalandars have taken their first title, so it's the happiest I've been across all PSLs. But yeah, it's good to be here, man.
So you're a happy man. So you support Lahore. How did that come about?
Honestly, it was just picking a side. It came to the start. I'm not personally from Lahore. There's definitely a thing for people in Pakistan where you pick the closest city you come from, and there's like things like Karachi and Lahore rivalries, which actually go back before the PSL. So they have the derby in that sense. That's what I refer to as the derby of the PSL. But Lahore was just a team I picked, and it, like I said, it wasn't something I was gonna plan on 4 seasons. We're like bottom of the table. We're struggling for wins every season. It looks like on paper we have something. Chris Gale was a signing. We had, I think, in the very first season, we had the likes of Dwayne Bravo. Not too long after West Indies won the World Cup. So we always had, sort of good sides. Brendan McCullum, AB de Villiers. We never quite got there, but yeah, we finally got our first title from a team that probably didn't look as strong on paper compared to the other ones they've had in the past. But yeah.
I love the fact that you basically divvied up which teams you're going to support throughout your family, right? Didn't you say that your mum selected Peshawar?
Yeah. So yeah, we all just kind of picked a side. It's kind of split across all. So someone in my family supports one of the sides. I'm the only one that supports the Qalandars, but now suddenly everyone's now they got the title. We've got a few more Qalandars fans in the house, but we won't talk about that. But,
Well,
yeah.
we obviously we had Ali Khan Tareen on before he left his position at Multan, so I think that we felt duty bound to be Multan fans.
Fair play.
And not in so much as that I'm one of Mohammed Rizwan's biggest fans, so I was just, yes, of course, we're definitely are going to be supporting Multan. But yeah, in terms of the whole PSL season, what were your takes from it? What were the highlights? Who were the top players for you, and who were the ones that perhaps are were struggling compared to what they usually do?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've personally seen over the last few seasons that playing as a foreign player is incredibly difficult. First of all, because of the fact that players don't play in Pakistan very often. So even the guys who are more experienced, like the Chris Gales, it would have been their very first experiences playing in Pakistan. So you kind of would have expected that sort of dip in performances. So, for example, when Tom Banton had that incredible run at Somerset, I think it was 2019 season with Babar Azam at the top of the order, he got a bunch of contracts, Big Bash, IPL. PSO was one of the first ones he played after Somerset. And he really didn't kick off. I think he maybe barely scored 100 runs across the set of games that he did play. But this season has been really good because we saw Will Smead really, really kick off. Top of the order, very first game. And he was actually, I think he was in as a replacement for Jason Roy while he wasn't there. And, we're talking about back-to-back 90 scores. So that was really, really interesting to see. It was good to see that he could play across different conditions. I think the fact that he played in the T10 may have helped because that was in Abu Dhabi. And yeah, other players alongside that, Harry Brooks, part of the Lahore Qalandars, had a great season. I would say he was played very much out of position just because we had a stack of batsmen above him. Fakhar Zaman, Abdullah Shafiq, couple names that I weren't too happy about batting above him. I think the way he's played at Yorkshire and in the 100, you would have expected him at like a 4 or 5. But he played out at 6 and he still did a really good job. He scored 100 for one of the games as well, which, aside the fact that he's a foreign player, scoring 100 is a big thing. The guys who have scored 100 are really and truly the guys who have been playing in Pakistan for years and years, like the Akmals. So that's been really exciting to see. And then again, of course, the emerging players, there's a couple that always stand out. Azam Khan was a weird one. His action is it's unorthodox to say the least. It's kind of like a kind of remake of Malinga, but he was incredibly effective. And yeah, there's a bunch of players I can name. Shadab Khan again, incredible tournament from him. It was a shame he got injured, and that kind of put the whole Islamabad pressure to a halt. But yeah, a bunch of names you can mention.
And when you link to the 100 here in the UK, the Pakistan players, who do you think would do well in English conditions in the 100? Because we had a couple of players from Pakistan last year, some of which did really well. But is there anyone in particular that you think needs to be signed by some of the 100 franchises?
It's interesting because I see a couple names in the Pakistan setup that I think could actually come in as one of the lower tier players. So it's a bit of a less of a risk for, the team in the hundreds. But I think Azam Khan is a really interesting pick. He had a little I think it was the 2020 season during COVID. So 2020 tour during COVID. When he came in with Pakistan and he played in the three match T20 series. He didn't really kick off, but he's definitely one of the most exciting players. We're looking at the 100, we're playing an incredible amount of wrist spinners and off spinners. Jake Linton, for example, is a guy who's coming through and had a good run in the 100. And Azam Khan, if I'm not wrong, is one of the best players against spin in the world statistically. His strike rate is just incredible. The way he attacks it is he's second to none right now, and I think it's just a case of him playing another tournament. Another player I think is Shadab Khan. Um, it's been weird. After his injury, he had a kind of a weird time with form. He was bowling well, but he wasn't batting well. But when it comes to the PSL, he takes a really good leadership position. Um, Bowling, he will take 3 for 24 or figures very similar to that in PSL almost every game, and he'd bat himself at 3 and 4 and score 50 runs. He was leading. He was in the top 5 run scorers in the PSL quite consistently.
I think I sort of agree with that. We almost had Shadab Khan a couple of times. I think at one point he was signed with the Southern Braves, and then he was signed with Manchester Originals, and then I think it was a Pakistan tour to the West Indies that sort of put paid to a lot of people's involvement. Jury's still a little bit out at the moment in terms of how international schedules are going to be affected, but obviously these are domestic competitions, so these things happen. But yeah, I was excited at the prospect of someone like Shahnawaz Dahani playing in England. I've just always got a thing about sort of tall, awkward bowlers. I remember thinking Mohammad Irfan was a real sort of ace up the sleeves of Pakistan for ages, because he wasn't necessarily fast, but he was huge. But yeah, it's an exciting time, and of course I would love to see Mohammad Rizwan, but we're in a very exciting place at the moment because the squad retentions have come up, and for many teams they've actually gotten released quite a lot of their international players, particularly Manchester Originals, who've released all of them. So fingers crossed, maybe we'll get Shadab Khan. But in terms of going ahead, I guess one of the last questions I had was the England players for whom a lot of people who follow the international stuff we might not see too much of. So I'm thinking of people like, Will Smead, Will Jacks, and Jake Lintott, people like that. Who did you see in the PSL who you think these guys are taking into some good form coming into the summer?
Yeah, like I said before, Will Smith and Harry Brooks take the lead on that 100%. There was quite a big disparity between guys who did well from the England side. I think it was 26 England players that were signed in the PSL, which is huge. Especially the fact that it's in Pakistan, because a couple of seasons ago there were barely any. But it was a big disparity, even for guys like Chris Jordan. So I think Harry Brooks and Will Smith definitely led it. I'd like to see Tom Lamond be given a better chance. Karachi Kings selection choices were all over the place. We had guys who were number 4 was batting number 7. Tom Lammonby was batting at, I think, anywhere between 7 and 9 in one game, which was ridiculous when you're in a chase. So from that sense, I don't think he was given a fair run. And it makes sense if you're batting at 7 in a 170 chase where your team's scraping a 6 or 7 run rate. When you come in, you're not naturally gonna take your team to the end. So I'd like to see him given a better chance. Phil Salt had a very average PSL for me, which was surprising. I was really relying on him to be a big run scorer for us. He's always a guy who's on the brink of getting a good England run in T20 and ODI cricket, but he never quite seems to be there. So I'd like to see him given give him a good run. But yeah, Phil Salt's definitely one of them. Will Jack's been interesting. I still think Will Jacks has a season where he can really kick off. I don't necessarily think he's there. And that's a good thing because it means he's still getting these tournaments whilst he's still very young. So I'd like to see him play forward.
Excellent. Well, look, we're gonna wrap up there, but thank you so much for being on. Before we go, do you have any socials you want to plug before we go?
Yeah, check me out. I talk all my rubbish on Twitter, moblogs _. I'm getting back to my cricket content. I did a bit on Brooks and Smeed on TikTok, which is just moblogs. But until then, yeah, those are the two socials I'm really pushing for. Hopefully, you guys will see some content in England cricket. Talking with the fans this summer. But until then, we'll keep those as it is. But yeah, those are the two.
Yeah, thank you very much, Moblogs. That was fun. I really enjoyed chatting with him, and he's very knowledgeable about the PSL and especially about the domestic players in Pakistan. And I found it very interesting when he was talking about some of the lesser known England players who play out there. It gives us a lot of food for thought coming up for the 100. And you look, there is actually a lot of talent there. So, he was talking about people like Will Smeed and Henry Brooks. And these are people that people don't really talk about. Everybody thinks about Chris Woakes, Liam Livingstone and Ben Stokes and so forth.
It's really funny how every competition has their kind of go-to stars. Like I know James Vince, for example, always does really well out there. I know he is a household name here as well. But you've got Ben Cutting, for example, from Australia, who I really haven't heard of, only from his excellent batting in the PSL. So it's really interesting which competitions attract which players, because there's only a very small bracket of international places. So it's going to be super interesting to see what happens in next month's draft, so stay tuned. We should quickly talk about the Women's World Cup, because I feel that we had our hopes set really high at the beginning of this competition. I feel like we have a really great squad, a lot of potential, but unfortunately they lost the first 3 games, and now it looks like they might not make the semi-finals at all, which is such a shame.
Yeah, it really is. There is a small glimmer, beating India, which is no mean feat. But yeah, it's looking tight. Now, at the time of recording, because we're about to jump into our chat with Abi, this was when the Women's World Cup had only just started. So we'd seen 2 or 3 matches at that point. And I think it's very prophetic what Abi was saying. But anyway, without further ado, we will go on to the interview with Abi, where we talk about the Women's World Cup and also Anderson and Broadgate, which I know was a bit of a hot button topic for not just us, but for everyone. Anyway, here you go. Abi Slade, welcome to the 100 Report. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very good. Very happy to be here.
Welcome. Happy to have you.
Well, I guess the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is obviously we've just sort of gotten to the tail end of England's winter. You spent a bit of time basically living on Australian time, being a super fan as far as
I did.
How was that?
It was really fun. They contacted me about 2 weeks before, I think, so I knew it was coming, and I knew it was going to be the Boxing Day test. So I didn't quite, because when you say Boxing Day test, I always forget about Australian time, and you always instinctively think, oh, that's our Boxing Day. And of course it is our Boxing Day, but the early hours of our Boxing Day. So I was so nervous about being drunk on national TV that I had 1 glass of Bucks Fizz at 11 a.m. and then I just didn't have anything for the rest of the day, because I was so nervous about either being drunk or falling asleep. But it was my sleeping pattern has only just got back up to scratch.
See, I'd be so nervous taking a nap during the
time. I set
set
about 5 alarms.
Oh, wow. And did you apply for it, or did they just get hold of you through your social?
So the Barmy Army contacted me and asked if I wanted to be a super fan, because I think they've got an in with, or like they were just, as they are the fan base of England cricket, I think they've got an in of finding the supporters to put on the show.
And if you guys haven't been to Abby's Twitter page, you must go, because you've pinned that tweet, which Chris told me to have a look at, where you dug out Sir Alistair Cook. That was a really funny moment.
Take that, Alistair.
Yeah.
If you're listening, be afraid.
I was going to say that was one of my favourite things was you getting internet famous for mugging off Sir Alistair.
Well, the thing was, that day, because that was I was on for the 5th test, and as you were logging in, their contact that set you up and got you sorted said, oh, we've had a running joke with the fans wearing hats in the last few episodes. Does anyone have any hats that they'd like to wear? And I thought that I was going to be left out if I didn't wear a hat, and I was like, oh, I'll be in on the joke. And then I was the only one wearing a hat, so then I got called out on it.
Well, it's good because people got to see that you're a diehard Somerset fan. So that's
yes, exactly.
Good. Well, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about England's winter because I think to say mixed was a little bit generous. It's been a trying time if you're an England fan.
Yes.
And obviously the Ashes did not go anywhere near to plan. At least we can take some small solace that it wasn't a whitewash. But I was thinking I wanted to chat a little bit about what your thoughts were about the squad, and especially into the West Indies, because we've got a revamped squad, and most notably James Anderson, Stuart Broad, they aren't there. What's your thoughts on that?
My first thoughts that I'm absolutely devastated. I understand that they are trying to take England not in a different direction, but I understand that if Broad and Anderson don't go now or soon, then we're going to be stuck with loads of fast bowlers who can't reach their prime because they're not being given the opportunity to bowl. And then who knows what the England setup would be like in a few years' time. But it just feels bizarre not having a squad without Anderson or Broad in it. And they're not even the injury call-up. I think it's Liam Norwell that's the first one who will get a go if any of the fast bowlers are injured, and it's bizarre to me.
Which happens a lot. That doesn't make sense to me. We've got Mark Wood, who unfortunately gets injured all the time. Jofra Archer, who hasn't even recovered from his injury.
Yeah.
So that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, it's like even with Ollie Robinson, that in the warm-up match he went off with a bad back. I don't know what the outcome of it was, but just England need to stop damaging their fast bowlers.
I think I always compared Jofra Archer as a specific example to somebody like Mitchell Johnson. I think like Michael Clarke utilised him in the best possible way. 3 overs, maximum 4. You're probably only going to bowl 20 in a whole session.
Yeah.
Whereas, you take that example a few years back in New Zealand where I think Jofra Archer bowled something like 47 overs in one session.
Yeah.
It's sort of understandable. Eventually he's going to break down. I take your point. I think I'm in two minds about the Anderson Broad gate because it's been such a huge fixture of England for ages that you can just stick Anderson on at one end.
Yeah, and they'll do something.
Yeah, or even if they don't do something, they'll go for like 1 or 2 runs and over.
Yeah.
And tie up an end. Yeah, but I sort of hope that this will be the making of Chris Woakes. That's kind of my hope, that he'll sort of step into that quote unquote Anderson area in terms of his similarity as a bowler, and he does have to up his stats overseas. So
I think there's a fair bit of pressure actually on Chris Woakes at the moment, because if you look at Ben Stokes, our sort of heroic all-rounder, I don't think he's back to his pre-injury fitness. And I think therefore there's actually a lot of pressure on Chris Woakes to be that genuine all-rounder that does really well. So what are your thoughts on Ben Stokes at the moment?
So Ben Stokes, I mean, I agree. I think obviously you want to take it easy coming back in after a bad health spell as he had, but I don't think he's there to be an all-rounder. He's there to be a batter of anything. I can't remember how much we saw him bowl in the Ashes, but I can't recall him doing particularly amazingly with the ball. One thing I will just say though, I'm really excited for Saqib Mahmood to come into the squad for the West Indies, because if we're going to have a fresh generation of talent, I want it to be Saqib Mahmood. Yeah,
it's especially being a Lancashire lad as far as the counties are concerned. It was, he's been just a stalwart for Lancashire, and
Yeah.
it was almost a shame in the 100 when he moved to Oval, because I thought,
Yeah.
we lost one there. But yeah, great action, balls at pace. I think this could be it. And again, because of Anderson and Broad, he's had trouble fighting his way into the test squad. So here's hoping. But moving slightly on, you're still somewhat on overseas time, because you've been staying up God knows how long watching the Women's World Cup so far, haven't
It's working in a bar. That's what will do it.
Is it a sports bar as well? Do you have the big
No,
screen cricket up?
no.
Because that would be amazing.
Which
wouldn't
benefits me, because the only sport that I like is cricket. And during the Euros, it was a godsend because nobody came to us and we would get out so early. And I would be avidly following the score along at home, like, they've gone into extra time. No one's going to come in up before last orders. It's fine. But yeah, it does make watching the cricket more difficult. But yeah, so it obviously started two mornings ago. Was it the 3rd? What day is it today? Is it the 5th? Yeah. So it started on the 3rd. It started at 1 a.m. yesterday morning. I'm losing track of all the days, and that's what hospitality will do to you. But started yesterday morning, obviously, with the West Indies versus New Zealand, where it's being held. And what a match. Like, I watched the first half an hour, and then I woke up. I said I was going to wake up for the last hour because I had a meeting in the morning. That did not happen. I woke up about 5 minutes before the meeting and checked the score and quiz and was like, oh God, I missed a good one there. So it was so close. And then obviously England played Australia this morning, and I got home from work in time to watch Nat Siver's wicket, and then I just kept saying, I'll go to sleep when the next wicket falls, and then it didn't fall. So then I went to bed at about 3:15 or something, and it was a disappointing result to wake up to, but not entirely unexpected after the Ashes.
Heather Knight said after this defeat this morning that she wasn't disappointed, because actually it was an amazing game. A lot of the players really excelled and did really, really well.
Yeah, they did.
How do you see, from watching the first game of England, obviously against the favourites Australia, how do you see our standings just from seeing that first match?
In the whole World Cup, I don't want to be pessimistic after a long winter in England of English cricket. I don't want to be pessimistic, but there are definitely things that will stand out, like Nat Siver, amazing, and there's a really good opportunity to build players who haven't had so much of a go before.
My gut tells me that Australia are going to do it, but
yeah,
we'll see. But you made an interesting point about developing younger players, because obviously, as the 100 report, we've been watching quite a lot of the women's matches, and I think one of the positives from the women's game is all of these breakout stars that are coming. I'm thinking of Sophia Dunkley, or I'm thinking of Alice Capsey in particular, who are coming up and through the ranks. So I guess my question would be, as far as the players that we saw coming through the 100, are there players that you want to see getting more of a go in the England squad, who perhaps made a bit of a name for themselves during last summer?
Yes, so I'm really excited for Izzy Wong to come back into the England side. I am really excited to watch Alice Capsey. I don't know when she's going to get her England debut, because obviously I always forget that she is just a baby. Which is she 17 now, I think, or maybe still 16, but absolutely crazy. Sophia Dunkley as well made her English debut last winter, and I'm really excited to watch Sophia Dunkley's career continue. And as always, Sophie Eccleston, I mean, she's an established talent now, but I often forget that she is still so young.
When we go through the squads, I remember just constantly being in awe at some of these, some of the women players' economy rates and things like that. And Sophie Eccleston is just in another sphere of existence. Yeah. It's an exciting time for English cricket. But Izzy Wong has been a particular favourite of mine for a long time, and I'm hoping she does, and I'm hoping that she gets faster and faster as time goes on. And it's
without driving her into the ground like the rest of the England bowlers.
100%, yes.
Protect is one.
Well, that's kind of all the questions we had. Thank you so much for being on. As far as yourself, is there anything you want to plug? You want to plug your socials and things like that?
I would like to plug my Twitter, which is Abi_Slade. Abi spelt the correct way of ABI. And also, please listen to my podcast that I run with a few friends called Murali End, it sounds like it's entirely about Muralitharan. It's not. We touch on a lot of English and Sri Lankan cricket, and we recently had an interview about the Women's World Cup with Alex Hartley. So please listen in.
Well, thanks so much, Abi, again for joining us. I thought that was a really insightful chat, and I liked asking her about the fan zone that she managed to get into with BT Sport. Rather jealous myself. Call me next time. But I think we should just quickly touch on the fact that England men's are in Barbados currently, halfway through the second test. The first test, unfortunately, was a draw. We ran out of time, but from a terrible batting start, which we thought, oh no, here we go again, they actually managed to pull back and set a decent total, one of the highest totals they've managed to do for a while. Since then, we've had another ton from Joe Root at his new position of number 3, which for me is super encouraging, because I just thought, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It was one of the things that was really working for us, him being at his favoured position of number 4. But for me, that was really exciting to see him make a century at that number 3 position.
Very exciting, and Joe Root is just the GOAT. I think we were all a bit confused because we thought that Sir Alistair Cook is going to go down as being the greatest England batsman ever, and I think we're in that realm with Joe Root now. I think he could surpass Sir Alistair. Especially, he seems to score hundreds at will at the moment. I mean, the Ashes was an aberration, as we discussed with Abi. It was something we'd all rather forget. But yeah, it's very exciting, and it's nice to see the batting unit actually, have a substantive knock. Even Alex Lee's got 30 odd, which is heartening.
Yeah, I think we heard his breathing of relief from here, all the way from here, because to get through that first test, it's always so nerve-wracking. So the second one, you can start building on stuff. And you know what? Hey, at least it wasn't a duck, which is what we've been used to in a lot of the Ashes. What's interesting to see is Paul Collingwood is obviously stepping up as interim head coach, and I have to say, Chris, that I'm really, really keen, even though I know people were talking about a lot of Australian names we mentioned before. I am really keen to stick with, an English, a British head coach, because if you look at the 100, if you look at these competitions, you're nurturing a lot of these players to be international superstars, but you're not really nurturing any English coaches to take big positions abroad. So I really feel like Paul Collingwood should be given the chance.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't really have much more to add to that. Yes, he should be given a go, and I think that he's proved himself as far as a test player, and he's probably one of the best fielders that England have ever had. And it just seems that the players like him, which I think is crucial, because that dynamic between coach and player is such a big one. But I think that, yeah, I would love to see him have a go, but I guess they're still taking applications, and we will soon see.
It will be interesting though if Justin Langer does come over fresh from Australia with all of that inside knowledge for the next Ashes. That's also would be quite interesting. But stay tuned for our roundup. We're going to do before the draft of the 100. We can kind of go through each team in more detail and see what they're actually missing, what they need to get from the big draft. And then of course on the day we'll be tweeting and on socials about how the draft is going as and when it happens.
Yeah, and as far as the retained players, if you want to have a little look in depth at where they are, I'll put a link to the BBC website where it's got the list of all of the retained players, and you can make some decisions for yourself. But as always, if you're not subscribed to us yet, please do. We are on YouTube at The 100 Report. We are on Instagram at The 100 Report, and we're on Twitter at 100 report. And do please send us your comments, send us your questions. We love hearing about it. What do you think as far as the international schedule? Is that going to affect overseas players? Who's your pick for overseas? But as ever, thanks again for listening, and it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Have yourself a good one. Speak to you soon.